Welcome everyone. Let's see, my name is Stacy Yu and I'm the Communications Chair with the MIT Club of Washington, D.C. So thank you for joining us this evening for the presentation Parenting During a Pandemic. Whether your kids are back in school or still at home doing virtual learning, our speaker, Katherine Reynolds Lewis, will be providing helpful tips and insight on how you can manage working from home, 24/7 parenting, and relieving anxiety and stress for both you and your kids. Katherine Reynolds Lewis is an award-winning journalist, author, and speaker based in the DC area, and she focuses on topics including parenting, children, education, and mental health. She's a 2020-2021 MIT Knight Science Journalism Fellow and graduated cum laude from Harvard University with a bachelor's degree in physics. Her award-winning book, The Good News About Bad Behavior, explains why modern kids are so undisciplined and tells the stories of innovators who are rebuilding lost self-regulation, resolving family conflict, and changing the trajectory of young lives. A portion of this book takes place at Columbia's Developmental Affective Neuroscience Lab. Katherine's work has appeared in The Atlantic, Bloomberg Businessweek, Experience Life, Fortune, Medium, The New York Times, Parents, Slate, USA Today, The Washington Post, and Working Mother. She's also appeared on CNN, NPR, Bloomberg Television and Radio, and HuffPost Live, as well as many TV and radio programs nationally and internationally. Katherine is also a certified parent educator with the Parent Encouragement Program, or PEP, right here in Kensington, Maryland. So welcome, Katherine. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Stacy, for that really lovely introduction. And thanks to everyone in the audience for being here. I know that the demands on our time are many, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And huge thanks to Diane and Kim from the MIT Club for supporting this event, and also to the Harvard and Columbia Clubs for co-sponsoring. So if you haven't taken the poll, I'm going to give you one more minute. I see there are some people in that 19 plus age group. So for you and for the parents of older teens, you may be wondering if it's too late to learn new tips and tricks or to adopt new approaches to parenting. And I'll share with you what I said to a mom who called into the Pete Dominick show when I was on during my book launch, who was very concerned because her daughter was still living in her basement. And she said, "Is it too late, Katherine? I really appreciate the things you're offering, but my daughter is 36. And I said to her, no, it's never too late. It's never too late to transform your relationship with your child, with yourself, or even not transform, just to learn one or two new ideas or approaches. So that's what I'm hoping to leave you with tonight, is at least a couple more ideas for how to make your parenting life better, how to support your kids in this tough time. And I want to begin just by acknowledging that we are all coming into this space together from very different places. It's been a hard news week for many of our communities, hard news year in many ways, or decade for our different communities, our Black communities, our trans communities, our Asian American communities, and more. You know, everyone's been affected by the pandemic in some way or another. So please just take a breath, right? Be here with us. And I invite you to give yourself the gift of monotasking, of just giving your full attention to this conversation, because I hope it will be a conversation about parenting during a pandemic. And just take the next hour to be here with us. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Let's see. So it looks like we have a lot of little guys, the 0 to 4, I'm sorry, 5 to 9. And then people are really concerned about mental and emotional health and academics, of course, as well as screens, the perennial beast. So we will definitely be covering all of these topics. And thank you very much for those who responded to the poll. So I come to this topic of parenting, and especially supporting kids' social and emotional skills and their mental health, from the perspective of a journalist, as Stacy kindly said, and the author of The Good News About Bad Behavior. So I spent 5 years really trying to understand what's going on with kids' behavioral and mental health nowadays. I traveled across the country to go into different research labs. I went into schools. I observed hundreds of hours of education, of innovative practices to try to help kids manage their thoughts, behavior, and emotions. And I went into homes, and my kids like to say I stalked families because I would just hang out and watch and see what was happening. And usually something pretty interesting happens when you just observe people parenting in real time. And I came away from that 5 years of research really convinced that we are facing an unprecedented level of anxiety, depression, ADHD, and suicidality. And 3 years ago, when the book came out, I used to give this talk, and the first half was about making the case that this is a real phenomenon that we really need to take seriously. And after the last year, I feel like I don't need to make that case anymore. I think the headlines have made it for me. And a lot of us are experiencing in our own homes the challenges of supporting kids with managing their thoughts, behavior, and emotions, whether that's an anxiety diagnosis or executive function challenges or ADHD, or even just, needing new tools, being more blue than usual or being more chaotic than usual. So that's what we're going to talk about for the next hour. And as Stacey mentioned, one slice of my book did take place at Columbia University. I went to the developmental affective neuroscience lab to ask the researchers there to judge my parenting. So yeah, not everyone would do this, but I wanted to understand how they're learning about kids' development of emotions and what's the relationship between parenting and kids' experience of emotions and mental health and emotional health. And the only way I could get into the lab was to volunteer myself and my daughter, Ava, who you see here as subjects. So here we are. You can see we have EKG leads attached to our collarbones and also to our bellies. And the scientists measure saliva to get a measure of cortisol, which is a rough proxy for stress. They're also monitoring our breath, our breathing, our heart rates. And what they're finding is there's all this subconscious connection between parent and child and co-regulation going on. So after just a couple of minutes together in a room, Ava and I start to have synchronized heartbeats. We start to have synchronized breathing and they've actually found that kids perform better on tests when there are parents in a room, which thanks to Zoom school, we sometimes are, not that I recommend that. But the implications are pretty profound for us as parents, that if your kid is yelling at you, if they're having a meltdown, if they're refusing to wake up or log on to Zoom school or sit down at the table, right? They may be yelling, their voice is high, they may be breathing quickly, their rate is up. It's really natural for us to feel that in our bodies. Right? Our heart rate starts to speed up, our breathing speeds, we may start to want to raise our voice, and our thoughts may go into sort of a catastrophic spiral. And if we follow down that path of dysregulation, it can become really a reinforcing cycle with our kids where they become more dysregulated and nobody gets any thinking done, any problem solving done. On the other hand, if we can catch ourselves in that moment, find a way to calm our bodies, we at least have a better chance of reaching our kids and helping to support them in learning to regulate. And all of us have been so challenged in the last year to just manage the activities of daily life, right? Being regulated, dealing with the unknown stress of COVID, whatever challenges your families may have faced because of the pandemic. So this is sometimes easier said than done, right? To manage yourself, manage your own emotions. And I learned this myself last year, right? In March, when everything shut down, the first couple of weeks were just spent surviving, right? Binging Netflix, drinking a little alcohol every night. And then after 1 week, I looked at the recycling and realized that my husband and I, between the two of us, had finished 7 bottles of wine in a week. That's not typical for us. And for me, it's not healthy. So that was just numbing out my own anxiety, fear, stress, lack of control over the pandemic. And I realized I needed to find better ways to process. And I needed a whole new set of tools to manage these really unusual circumstances. So as tempting as it is, and those are sometimes our go-to strategies to like numb out and try to just deal with stress in less healthy ways. we really need to be present for our kids because we are their foundation, right? We're their center and rock for their emotional journey. And this is not meant as a guilt trip for anyone who's managing anxiety or depression or another challenge, because in my book, I found that 1 in 2 of us is managing a behavioral mood disorder, right? It's really, really common. The key is that we're going to try to find all the different strategies that might work and just figure out what works for us. So as I speak about these topics, if something I share seems aspirational for you, or you're like, I am just trying to get by, Katherine, why are you talking about these high level things? Please keep listening, right? Bookmark it in your head as a not now thought rather than no way, because you may come back to it later and find that it does have some value for you. So in this Columbia study that I went to with Ava, I found that I learned just very viscerally about how attuned our kids are to us. And that's the foundation for their own ability to regulate. So the 3 things I'm going to talk about really start with that. These are the only, the primary topics I'm going to address tonight, that we need to take care of ourselves, that it's a time that many of us are overwhelmed. And so taking care of ourselves are in ways that are compassionate and thoughtful and realistic is going to be the first most important thing that helps our family thrive. Number 2 is to enforce healthy routines, right? So brainstorm with your kids, and even 3, 4, 5-year-olds can think about a family routine that includes the essentials for physical and mental health, right? So sleep, outdoor time, meals, family togetherness. I know there's so many ideas, and especially at the beginning of the pandemic, there were all these color coded, charts of activities and the school Zoom, and it's great to aim high, but I also think we need to think about bare minimum parenting standards and decide for yourself what that is, and then just let go of the extras. The most important thing is to be there for and with your kids, and really accept what we can't control and control what we can, because ultimately what your children need is just you, your non-reactive presence, your honesty when you're scared or sad or stressed. And this is not about the full depth or truth of your worst fears, but at least modeling how we manage and accept some of these uncomfortable feelings. Our kids need our playful spirit, our enjoyment of their silliness, our leadership with confidence in this really tumultuous time. So last but definitely not least, look for those ways to find joy, even if it's small. So what's taking care of yourself? So I used to get really frustrated with articles about self-care because I don't like bubble baths. Right? I'm not a big, salon person. But certainly in this time, I think we are learning again that the things that biology tells us we need to thrive: regular sleep, healthy food, exercise and fresh air, and connection with families, friends, and community are more important than ever, because they can sometimes fall by the wayside. So yes, it can be hard, right? When you have little kids and you're managing Zoom school and the house and you're not getting a lot of outlets, it can be hard to make self-care a priority. And yes, this often means setting limits at work, creating boundaries with family and friends, asking your partner, if you have a partner, to really collaborate on how are we going to make this work so we both have our needs met and also can support our kids. But it's so important. And the 5th bullet point here, limiting triggers, I obviously we're thinking about alcohol, right? Substances being on your phone or your screen or your computer too often. It's just about understanding ourselves, what tends to make us less patient, what tends to make us more reactive. And I put people here because you probably have these friends, I know I do, whose kids are thriving in pandemic. They've created this wonderful, project to support all of the kids in our area who need extra backpacks, and they've done a huge drive, and it's great. I love those kids. Or they're like building an aqueduct for in another country, but not everyone's there. And so if you have friends like that who trigger your sense of anxiety, or like, my kids aren't doing okay, or I'm not giving them enough as a parent, maybe limit time with those friends as well. Really focus on what you notice that helps you to thrive. So it's about understanding that feedback loop. And I'm going to add this last bullet point, which is my invitation to figure out what works for you, because I have definitely had to adopt new tools in the last 13 months, right? Really luxurious special tea. I have weekly or biweekly therapy now for the first time since I was at Harvard, because I need it. I've done Zoom yoga with a group of friends every Saturday morning for the last year, because these are new tools that I needed to really feel grounded and centered and be the best parent that I can be for my kids. So here are just a few ideas for the choose your own adventure option, right? Whatever helps you feel restored and gain that sense of capacity to deal with some of the stresses that put us all a little bit more on edge these days. So when you're trying out different activities to see what is really helping you to feel better, these are just some questions you can ask. You know, how are you feeling during it? How do you feel afterwards? Are you more present and flexible? Do you sleep better? Do you feel less stressed? And I realize myself, a lot of the things I do that are typically self-care, like exercise, like getting outdoor time, I actually don't feel restored. I just do it because I know it's good for me. That doesn't mean I'm not trying to do those things, but it means that I need to dig a little deeper to find what is that really helps me feel restored. And it may be that these are not questions you've asked yourself since, you know, for a decade or longer. And so it may have changed. Really take the time to be creative. So that's you. And really that is the most important thing, because if the parents are thriving, then the kids will be able to do so much better. And there's just reams of research that one, you know, stable, really grounded source of connection, a parent who is able to provide reassurance and responsiveness to a child, is all that's needed for kids to thrive during adversity and to come out more resilient. So what about those kids? So there's a whole range of experiences that kids have had during the pandemic. And sometimes you'll see on the same week an article coming out bemoaning how poorly kids are doing, and another article come out about how well they're doing. So it's really up to you. You know best, right? Where your kids are now and what are their needs that are being met or maybe not being met. So what do they need? Really, kids need the same things we do, right? They may not know it, so we may need to enforce some of this. Sleep is not just good for physical health, it's a foundation of mental health. It's lack of sleep is connected to inattention, depression, obesity, our immune system. And we've actually lost, as a society, we've lost a minute of sleep every year for the last century. So as a society, we have tended to be sleep deprived. That may have changed for some people during this pandemic. And if so, it's really a boost for our health. Exercise, of course, is great. So we do family walks. The kids sometimes come along, but I keep inviting dance parties, whether it's like YouTube drills, whatever your kids like that is active, right? Even if it's like a Just Dance or something that is related to video gaming. I try to make sure everyone gets fresh air every day. I have teenagers, so sometimes that can be challenging. They'd like to just be in their caves, but I kick them out of the house, and generally they're pretty cooperative. And here, when I say limit triggers, right, substances and screens, hopefully we're not talking about alcohol or drugs for our kids, but sugar, caffeine, right? Chocolate, the things that can be dysregulating. It's an opportunity to just pay attention to what may be triggering your kids or giving them less capacity to deal with stress on a given day, on a given afternoon. So yes, our kids are on screens a lot more than they were before, and that's out of necessity, right? Because of online school, and just because that's often a way to connect, for them to connect with peers. But it's all about that feedback loop, and you having a sense of what are the patterns that seem to be helping and what are the patterns you might want to change. So notice what's not on this list is homework, right? Or online school. This is not going to be an academic year for most of our kids, it's not going to be their biggest learning year, but they're going to learn other things besides content, right? They're going to learn about themselves, about how they manage, they're going to learn about their family, and those are just as valuable things. So when regular school resumes, they'll come back and they'll probably have to catch up on academics. But if they come out of this with that knowledge that they've really done other things. So what am I talking about here? It could be they've learned to play with their siblings because they have had to, right? And that's the only friend that they have. And maybe that you've developed new routines or habits or traditions as a family. It could be that they've learned how to manage a Google Calendar, right? Who knew that our middle schoolers would be doing that? But there's lots of things if we look for them. And the more that we notice them, the more that our kids will be able to focus on the things that they're really gaining as opposed to the things that they miss. So just as with adults, we're going to ask the same questions, help our kids ask themselves, right? And this is especially helpful for our teenagers or preteens who are using Instagram or Minecraft or FaceTime, and help them start to understand, like, I feel good after 20 minutes on Instagram, but after 2 hours, maybe I feel like I'm really unpopular and I'm ugly, right? So help them to just pay attention through neutral questions if you can. It may be that after an hour of Minecraft, they feel super creative and excited, but after 4, they're hungry and cranky. So as they start to develop their own feedback loop, eventually, of course, the goal is that they start to regulate it themselves. And over time, as they start to pay attention, they'll understand, I need a screen break, right? And that's when we can suggest playing Frisbee or throwing the ball or going out to pick some flowers or play with the dog or whatever the other non-screen activity might be. And that's just an example. I'm not trying to demonize screens. So this is all great, right? This all sounds wonderful. And in addition to supporting our kids' emotional needs and physical health, there are all the running of the household needs. So sometimes I feel caught in this endless cycle of cooking and cleaning, and you may be as well. So for this is sort of the center of my book, is trying to figure out, yes, how can I be a responsive, supportive, emotionally attuned parent and not be the person who's always cleaning up the dishes? So when I first had my first baby, I had never changed a diaper. I really didn't know a lot about kids. I had spent my adult career as a journalist with other adults. And when I thought about, okay, how do we enforce chores? How do we enforce routines? I thought about the tools that my parents used to get me to do something. And that is the carrot or the stick. So I think often when we think, how do I get my kid to do this? Or why won't my child do this? We instinctively reach for one of these two, the reward of the carrot or the punishment of the stick. So it could be everything that they do wrong results in a screen time violation, or everything that they want is we're going to pay them for. And the problem with that is that there's a huge body of research that shows that rewards actually undermine intrinsic motivation. So if we pay our children for grades, they start to discount the value of grades. And just one example of the type of experiment that's come out of this field is a group of people were given a unusual yogurt drink that wasn't common in their culture. I think it was Southern California. And one subgroup was asked to just try it and rate how tasty it was. And the other group was paid to try the drink. And the group that had not been paid rated it more tasty than the group that was paid. So when we give a reward, we're signaling to our kids, you know what, you probably shouldn't want to do this. So the only way you would want to is if I paid you. And then there's a ton of research on punishment, that it harms our relationship with our kids. It depending on how, there was actually a really recent study on criticism, yelling, and blaming kids that found that it undermined mental health and certainly undermines our relationship with our kids. So more important, I think, well, I don't know if there's anything more important than mental health, but in addition, when we use these tools of power with our kids, we are teaching them that the person in charge, the person most powerful is the best, right? And we're creating power hungry kids because they're going to want to be the ones who get to decide what's allowed, right? What is rewarded, what is punished. So I'm not trying to lay a guilt trip on anyone who's used these tools because they're extremely common and I use them myself, right? I'm trying to rely on them, not at all, but occasionally you slip up and it's not going to harm your child one time. But the more that we can use tools that are teaching them to manage their behavior, thoughts, and emotions, the more we're conveying that self-control to them instead of us being the ones who are controlling it externally. And ultimately, that's our goal at 18, that we shove them out the door no matter what their destination is, and they have all the skills that they need to thrive in life because they've learned how to manage themselves, how to be responsible, and how to interact with other people. And this sort of sums up the 5 years that I spent on my book. And I know that for some people, this is not a big deal. For some others, they'll say, oh my gosh, what do we do now? And the good news is that there are a huge array of road tested, research-backed models that are shown to build kids' self-control, self-regulation, ability to manage their behavior, thoughts, and emotions, however you want to frame it. And one way I like to think about this is that when we see our kids messing up or doing something we don't like, we often reach for this, right? And instead, I'd like to invite you to take a scientist mentality, that the kid acting up or refusing to cooperate with the rules doesn't mean that they're going to be living in a van down by the river in 20 years, or that you've failed as a parent, or that there's something wrong. This is actually just a sign that you can experiment and figure out what's getting in the way of their success. So look at the situation, look at what the problem might be, whether it's something about their skills that they don't have, they just don't have the frustration tolerance to manage the situation, or they don't have the patience or the executive function, or maybe there's something about the environment that's making it hard for them to succeed. And really try to partner with your kids with this curiosity, the curiosity of a scientist, to find out what works. Another tool that's really helpful when you are trying to have a home environment that is building our kids' self-regulatory ability is to have family agreements be in charge and set the routines, as opposed to the parent deciding arbitrarily. So once a week at a family meeting, we will invite our kids' perspective on what's going well and maybe what needs a new family agreement. And these are the steps to negotiating a new agreement. And when you first start doing this, it's really important to know that it's probably gonna fail, right? The first couple times that we try out a new set of screen rules, or a bedtime agreement, or a chores agreement. So look at this as the first try, and you probably will need to revisit in a week or two, but invite your child's perspective. And when kids are involved in creating family agreements, they're much more likely to cooperate with them. So the bullet point number 4 is really important, that whenever you're negotiating the agreement, everyone's feeling positive and optimistic. Of course, it's going to work, but just in case it doesn't, what consequences should we have if you forget to take out the trash, or you don't give me your phone at 8:30, or whatever the agreement is? And this is the 4 R's rule of consequences, which I learned at PEP, the Parent Encouragement Program in Kensington, that if a consequence is related to the child's action, reasonable in scope, revealed in advance, and respectful of both the child and the parent, then that is a consequence that's teaching self-control. It's not just a punishment labeled with a different name. So the best teaching is when there's no parent intervention, right? Our kid forgets their lunch, and so they're hungry. That's a consequence that will teach them to remember their lunch. And it may take many times for them to create a system to remember their lunch, but it's going to be really related to the needs of the situation. For something where there is no natural consequence like that, you might have to create a related or natural consequence, like, a logical consequence. Like, if the bike is left out in the yard, then the bike goes away for a week. And in this, tone of voice and body language are really, really important, because you can turn a consequence that's perfectly logical into a punishment just by your negative affect and the tone of your voice. So we really have to if you can embody this positive intention and the neutral or positive tone of voice, that'll really make a difference in helping the consequences work. So as we implement any new routine, sleep is a really important a foundation. So again, just really make sure that you're thinking about sleep. And I just wanted to share my sister-in-law, Donna Lewis, writes the Reply All comic for the Washington Post Syndicate. And she put me in as one of her characters, Kim. So this is a little bit close to home, but fortunately, I'm not responsible for anything Kim says. So screen time is often what parents come to me feeling guilty about. And I would just say guilt is something you feel when you did something wrong. And we're all just really doing the best we can to figure this out. It's often a dynamic process. So the screen rules of the screen agreement that worked 3 months ago, maybe not, doesn't work. So it's about leadership. And it's really going to be what works for your family, and you know best. The only two areas I really encourage parents to limit is not to have screens in the bedroom, because with the exception of Zoom school, right? If that's the only space to do school, but especially at night, or if there's extended periods of time, that's where our tweens and teens can get into trouble with pornography, with sexting, with connecting with people in inappropriate ways. And so the more that you can have screens used in an open area of the house where you might walk by at any moment, the more that they're going to be loath to try those kinds of things. And number two, give your screens a bedtime, because late at night, as inhibitions are lowered, nothing good happens on TikTok or Snapchat at midnight or 1 a.m. So as kids get older, right, they're going to have more freedom and independence. And I always encourage parents to tie increased privileges with increased responsibility, so that kids understand that, yes, we want you to be responsible for more things and to have more freedom as soon as you demonstrate responsibility. So when it comes to screens, we want to make a family agreement, use the 4Rs rules, and follow through neutrally, right? You have to expect screens are really, really compelling. We try not to demonize screens, although this humane mousetrap for a while was our accountability when we were plugging the screens in at night, and they seemed to disappear from the charger. So we only had to use this for a few months, and then we found that it wasn't needed anymore. So in addition to all of the rules and the agreements and how that's super important, we also want to give our kids opportunities to connect with us and to contribute to the family. And this is a very deep human need to have a sense of purpose. So some of our kids have too little to do right now, and they can contribute to, like, for example, my daughter Ava here is helping to build a bookshelf. So every time we walk by that bookshelf, she knows that she helped make it. So contribution is a wonderful way to give our kids a sense of purpose. It helps them to learn actually life skills, and it's a really important building block of mental health. So I don't want to sugarcoat it, right? At first, yes, it takes a lot longer when you involve a child in a task, but over time, especially as kids get to be 8, 9, 10, they start to take over. And right now, our kids each cook one night of the week, and it balances out perfectly so that each adult only has to cook one other night. So it really ends up benefiting us if we start small and start when they're little, but it's never too late, as I said at the beginning. So this is one of the families I've followed for my book. And the mom, Scarlett Jackson, lives in Burlington, Vermont. And here you see her with her 4-year-old Scarlett using a knife that's about this long that she's using to cut walnuts, and she's going to mix into her yogurt. And you notice here that her mom is not directing. She's just watching. She's available if Scarlett needs help, but she knows her daughter's learned how to use a knife. First, she demonstrated it for her, then she did it with her. And now she's pretty independent using that knife. So you know your children best. Some of your 4-year-olds are not ready for a big knife to cut walnuts, but visiting this family really helped me learn how much more our kids are capable of. The 2 4-year-olds and the 7-year-old help to do the laundry, the cooking, the dishes. The 7-year-old helps to chop wood and light the fire that heats the house. So when kids have a chance to contribute in this way, they really have that sense of purpose, and it frankly keeps them out of trouble. So a little later in the day, when I was visiting the Jackson family, I observed this other scene that really stuck with me. And here Scarlett's twin Magnolia is having a complete meltdown because she can't go with her brother to his soccer game. And what struck me in this moment is what the mom actually wasn't saying to her daughter. She wasn't saying, stop crying. She wasn't saying, you're okay. She wasn't saying, I told you this morning you couldn't go with him. Why are you getting so upset? She was just holding her and empathizing. Yeah, I know you really wanted to go. She's giving her physical comfort and connection and empathy. And I realized she wasn't communicating that I'm going to melt because you're having a meltdown, or that your big emotions are somehow a problem. She was just accepting them and offering this sort of silent or quiet confidence that her daughter could handle these big emotions. So about 30 seconds after I snapped this picture, Magnolia jumped down and ran off to play. And that was another powerful lesson to me, because often when our kids are having difficulty, we think we need to do something, right? We want to solve it for them, or we want to intervene, or we want to make them do something. And often that connection, whether it's a physical connection or empathy, and communicating with them around their emotions or around the situation, are all that's needed to solve the problem, right? Because sometimes there's nothing to solve. Everyone has disappointment and big emotions, and it's important for our kids to learn to manage them. Here are some more ideas for connecting with kids that we all really appreciate. Special time is one-on-one, one parent, one child, doing what the child wants. And if for our little guys, it can just be 5 or 10 minutes. And as much as I hate Candyland, when my kids were little, I could handle 10 minutes of Candyland. As I mentioned, family meetings, we do once a week, and it starts with appreciation. So every family member goes around in a circle and names one thing that everyone else did in the previous week that helped them out. So this is not, I appreciate you because you're really a fast runner. It's, I really appreciated when I was doing a webinar and you saw that I was busy and you just closed the door and walked away. That really helped me continue my presentation without feeling distracted. Or I really appreciated when your brother was melting down and you went and gave him a big hug and helped him feel better, because I saw the big smile on his face and it meant that he was on the right track. So when we're connecting with our kids, we also want to think about eye contact, being at their level. I love cuddles and roughhousing or inside jokes, because kids are just so silly, right? All of these silly, playful, fun connection opportunities are really powerful for them. And the last one here is another tip I learned at the Parent Encouragement Program, is that we are going to have moments when our kids aren't doing the right thing. And when we walk into a room and we see that, our first instinct is often, why are you on the video games when it's dinner time? And if we do that, we will likely tip our kids into a dysregulated meltdown or defiance or something that is negative. And that probably will take longer than if we had just walked over, maybe touch them, put an arm around, say, oh my gosh, you still really love that Marvel superhero Lego video game, and dinner time. Doesn't mean that it's okay that what they did. It doesn't mean that there's no consequence. It just means that the correction doesn't have to happen first. So if you connect first, it's often going to make for a much better and easier time with that consequence. Communication is the other really important element of building our kids' ability to self-regulate. And these are a few ways to communicate with kids that build their ability to manage their thoughts, behavior, and emotions. So by positive language here, I mean, instead of saying something as an order or as a direction not to do something, see if you can flip it the other way. So classic example is when the lifeguard at the swimming pool says, instead of saying, don't run, say, please walk, or use your walking feet, right? I am a control freak. This is probably why I needed to write this book. So I am really inclined to tell my kids what to do. And the tools that I've found that work better are giving them information and asking them questions, because both of those put them into the thinking part of their brain, the prefrontal cortex, where you're problem solving, thinking ahead, planning, as opposed to the amygdala, where you're reacting to your bossy mom with anger, fight, flight, or freeze. So I invite you to try those too. And planning and thinking ahead is another great way just to build our kids' executive function. I feel like if there's one thing you ever do as a parent, it's this that will really help your child succeed. So this is, oh, you forgot your backpack at school when they're at school. What do you think you could do to remember it next time? And then making a plan and seeing how it works and then reflecting. And executive function is actually a better predictor of success in school and life than IQ. So executive function is really, really important. This is all the set of skills that help our kids to plan and think ahead and execute big projects and manage time and manage moving pieces. And the last one here is notes and signs. So we have so many visuals in our home, all of our family agreements. We have a visual schedule. For kids who aren't reading yet, it can be taking pictures of each step in the family routine. Creating it with them is a great way to give them some power and buy-in. And that way, when you're off routine, you can just point to the schedule, right? You're not as in there directing people around. It's really the agreement. So both connection and communication are so important, and they were in every model that I looked at in my book that teaches kids to self-regulate. And the third, which is we touched on before, is really helping kids to learn skills, build their capability. So there's interesting research that household chores are tied to happiness, that we actually when we, for example, make our bed every morning, we feel happier because we have that little jolt of satisfaction and we're able to get things done. Anchoring positive traits is something that I like to do when I'm working with a kid on something. Like, for example, if you're working with your kid on generosity and sharing, and you're always calling attention to like, can't you share? Why aren't you sharing? It draws their attention to the negative behavior. And instead, if the one time that they do share, if you notice it and name it, that will help anchor that positive trait that you want to build on. So I saw that you gave your sister 5 jelly beans that you got from grandma. That just lit up her face with a smile. That was what really kind of you. And it's what I call being generous. So these are the kinds of simple ways to help shift our kids' sense of themselves and help introduce new self-conceptions. The third bullet point here, letting kids fail, is always challenging, right? We want to solve things for them. We want to rescue them. And when you think back at your own history, how many really important milestone experiences were related to a failure you had. So we're not going to set our kids up for failure, but we also want to prepare the child for the path, not prepare the path for the child, right? We don't want to smooth everything out of their way. We want to help prepare them to deal with life's challenges. Asking our own kids for help can be a really wonderful tool. And then just role playing, teaching them emotional awareness. I feel like this is a lifelong thing to really help them to gain all the skills that they need to self-regulate, to manage their thoughts, behavior, and emotions. So last but definitely not least, we need to find these moments of joy. And I am a pretty serious person. So sometimes this can feel like another chore for me. And these parenting talks can often be very serious about like conversations with kids and negotiations and routines. So just find any opportunity to make things fun and silly. These are some social media photos that I'm sharing with permission from my friends, of a dad making eyebrows, homemade corsage for a prom last year, a birthday, decorated a door. One dad made an indoor obstacle course for his kids. This was early in the pandemic. And it could even just be, we sometimes do a walk and the kids like to go on their penny boards, and just letting them kind of zoom down the street on their penny boards and recording it can be really just simple and fun and easy. So this is all sort of the everyday level, right, of what we're going through. And I'll just add a few more, just touch on these, and I'm happy to share my slides afterwards in the email, because I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly. But all of these are skills that help us as parents to learn. You're not going to necessarily learn them right away, but reflective listening, just like empathy, just like special time, is a really, really powerful tool for being with our kids without taking over from them. And that's where I'm hearing that you're really upset that you can't go back to school yet because of our family's special health considerations, and it's really hard for you to see other people doing that. So it's just reflecting back to them what you hear them saying and offering them the opportunity to correct you if you got it wrong. I sometimes just need to see one small step in the right direction, and that'll be enough to give me hope of reframing our kids' negative attributes. I have one who we used to call stubborn, and now I think of as a future CEO who's going to be very well positioned to stand her ground in whatever path she chooses, brainstorming solutions, planning ahead, and when all else fails, right, can try again tomorrow. So every day is a new opportunity. There's so many wonderful coping skills out there. And no matter what your kids are wrestling with, whether it's anxiety or depression or ADHD or just dealing with the pandemic, it can be a nice opportunity for us to just explore with them, right? There's a wonderful a therapist named Janine Holloran, who talks about coping skills in 4 different buckets, these 4 buckets of processing, mindfulness, movement and senses, and distraction. So processing might be writing in your journal or spotting errors in your thinking or feeling your emotions in your body. Mindfulness could be like box breathing, using the hand and just paying attention, breathing in and then breathing out with a 5-finger hand. It could be a gratitude practice, moving and using your senses. This is really big with my kids. So it could be going out in nature, having something cold on your forehead, having warm tea, something that really engages your senses or is kinetic. And then distraction is a perfectly legitimate coping skill. So it could be going out with a friend on a socially distanced walk, or playing with your pet, doing a game, or reading. And for those kids who are really managing anxiety or depression, I often recommend having a family tradition at dinner or at breakfast. What was one risky thing you did today or yesterday, right? To normalize risk taking and normalize failure. A lot of therapists recommend externalizing your anxiety and sort of talking to it as another object. So like, I see you, Fred, I see you trying to amp me up, and we're not going down that path today. So that can sometimes help with kids. I mentioned a gratitude practice again. And I also love something that a couple of friends, Phil Spagel, who's a psychologist, as a counselor in the DC area, and has a wonderful book. I'm just looking to see if I have it here. She has kids write down, on cue cards, 3 things or 5 things that people really like about that people appreciate about them, that are qualities that they like themselves, and put it around their workspace so that they always have that visual reminder. And I've actually done it myself. For me, I write down compliments that people give me. So when I'm having a bad day, it's right at hand, and it helps me out. So this is my stockpile from way back a year again, and you have one too. I hope that all of these ideas will be part of your stockpile for making it through the rest of this pandemic and whatever happens next. In addition to all the physical needs that the toilet paper and the pasta and crackers take care of, our kids have emotional and developmental needs that are real and that may be more acute right now. So if there's only one thing that you take away from this talk, I hope it's this new mindset that problem behavior isn't a sign that there's something wrong, right? We're going to be curious. We're going to investigate as scientists. And when our kids are acting up or being chaotic, if we can catch ourselves and not react with anger or bossiness or high emotion, and instead be really intentional and explore with them, that's going to be the path that helps us to help them learn to manage their thoughts, behavior, and emotions. And it may be that they need that new skill or they need a change in routine. And the only solution is really just to try different things until you find out what works. So thank you so much for your time. I'm really happy to take questions. Please feel free to follow me on social media. You can sign up for my newsletter at my website. And I'm going to stop the share and look forward to conversation.
Thank you so much, Katherine, for a fantastic talk and lots of great tips and ideas for us to try. So we have We technically have 8 minutes left in the hour. However, we are gonna, if it's okay with you, we're gonna extend the time so that we can answer all the questions that come in, and we do have a few. If you have a question for Katherine, please be sure to submit it in the Q&A portion. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little Q&A icon, and that's where everything is loaded. Okay, so the first question that we have is, how do we teach kids, and this person has an 11-year-old boy, to do what's in their best interest? All the things that were on the basically everything that was on the self-care
Oh,
slide,
no.
right? No matter how much I try to remind, teach, nag, he doesn't see it the way I do and does not accept what is best for him.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely feel you. And it can be so hard to see our kids self-sabotage, right? If it's like whether it's staying up too late or procrastinating or eating terrible food. And especially at 11, right? He's going to be resistant to direction. So I would definitely try not to nag, right? Try not to remind, and instead use those questions, or say, I'm noticing, right? You can be like, hey, I'm noticing that you didn't eat lunch and it's 3 o'clock and you just had a fight with your siblings. So I'm wondering if that's related to not eating, or, sort of bring things up in as neutral way as you can, or ask them what they think would be helpful. So inviting him to say, hey, what do you think would be a good routine for you? I'm concerned about X, Y, or Z. What are your feelings? And having a conversation about it will at least get it started in his head. And for the things that really drive you bonkers, I think it's reasonable to say, I realize you don't feel this is a problem, but for me, it's really hard to tolerate. So can we come to an agreement that you're going to shower twice a week? Because when it goes too long, I feel uncomfortable, like I'm not preparing you for the real world. And then see if you can come up with an agreement. And the final one I would suggest is even just to say, totally went out of my head, but if I remember it later, I will tell you. It's hard. I mean, I would just say, like, it's real. And this year, especially, we've had this very up close and personal view of how much our kids are a mess, because childhood is messy. And one of the things that really helped me recently was my son unearthed my childhood diaries. So I kept a diary all through middle, high school, and college. And apparently I also procrastinated, and I studied the wrong thing for chemistry and I got a C, and I ended up going to Harvard. So it can't have been all bad, but sometimes it's hard for us as adults to remember how much we wasted time and ate junk food and didn't make good choices. And sometimes making those bad choices is the only path for him to decide and figure out, okay, what is in my best interest? So I would say your priority should not be getting him to do what is in his best interest, but having the conversation with him and building his own awareness and coming up with whatever agreements he's willing to live by that will help you to tolerate it, because I think it's real. I mean, it's really hard for parents to watch that.
Thanks, Katherine. Okay, the next question is, how can parents help children develop ways to deal with boredom and encourage self-generated thought?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I would love to know if you can put in the age of the child, because I think it's really different for different kids. And this is also an area where temperament is so varied. Some kids are really, really easily entertained, and some really don't. So for our little kids, right up until age 8 or 14 and 16-year-old boys. Okay. Yeah. So, in that case, I would say you need to ask them, like, again, with these sort of noticing questions about, like, hey, I'm noticing it seems like it's really hard for you to be bored. And I honestly think this is something where there's a bit of a generation gap, because our kids have been raised with constant stimulation, right? They always have something available to entertain them. And maybe just try to build up their tolerance with, like, walks in the outdoors, or conversations with them. This is something where I think camp plays a really wonderful role if kids can go to a camp that's screen free, because at least they get that break. But it's hard for 14 and 16. I think it's just a really challenging age to start to do that. And I would suggest being there with them, right? And having conversations about the news or social justice, or our teenagers are so passionate about so many things that may be your best entry in to hear what they are thinking, right? They may have some ideas that they're just not sharing, and the more you can draw them out and really have a conversation or even a debate about what they care about, that's going to be the way to build some of those problem solving, critical thinking skills.
Thank you. Okay, next question is, how do you deal with a perfectionist child?
Yes, so this is a great question. So perfectionism is a form of anxiety. And I know, sometimes people use it as this, humble brag, like I'm such a perfectionist. But if it can be really crippling if you cannot turn in an assignment until it's perfect, or you have to rip things up because you didn't get just right. And it's a long-term goal to help a perfectionist child be more tolerant of mistakes. So back to that slide about like take a risk every day. I would say you want to normalize making mistakes in your family. So show them, model for them when you make a mistake and you mess up, and how you can cope with not being a perfectionist. I have one of those, and I kind of am one of those myself. So often our kids are picking up what's just in the air in their homes. I'm guessing the people in this audience are pretty high achieving humans. So our kids, you don't even have to say it to them, they know. So often it's about like, hey, I'm having trouble being a perfectionist. Can we go on this journey together, even and help, and ask your kid to help you to be more tolerant of mistakes and more comfortable with messiness. So, but the sooner you start, the more tolerance you'll help your child to build with messiness and making mistakes and taking risks. And just there's so many wonderful books, anxiety workbooks, and one that I really like. Katie Hurley has a positive thinking handbook for teens. She also has the depression workbook for teens, which I think has just as much that's useful for anxiety as it is for depression. So, but it's a journey. So, identifying the issue is the most important thing.
Thank you. Fantastic advice. Next question. I have a 12-year-old boy. He lived basketball before the pandemic. Now he spends all his time on playing online games. How should I encourage him to go outside and shoot some hoops?
So could you invite him to go with you? Even our older tweens, 8-year-old up to 8-year kids are very, very social. They're social workers. They're going to want to do chores with you. They're not going to want to go and clean the room, but they might clean it with you. And even up to 11, right? If you invite them to participate, they might be more willing. And again, this is an age where they're not going to respond well to nagging or bossing, but invitations can often work well, whether that's, hey, would you like to go with me? Or, would you like to try to set something up with a friend down the street? So those are my suggestions. Or it could even be just noticing like, hey, you used to really live basketball. What's going on with that? Have your interests changed, or, or is there something else you want to explore? Maybe try Frisbee or try skateboarding, or, maybe there's something else that might spark his interest. And you might learn that there's something going on. Maybe basketball is so different one-on-one that he doesn't want to play it if it's not the way it used to be. So it could be a good entry to a conversation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. Okay, I have gotten so frustrated with the video games that I just got a lock on the door of a room so that when my husband and I leave, we can lock up the games so they do not play them. I'm guessing this would not be what you would suggest, but what do you think about concerns that addictive type behaviors with games could lead down the line to other addicted type behaviors?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable depends on how long you're out, but I think what I might suggest is to talk about screens and video games as part of a healthy diet of activities, right? So ask your kids like, hey, we need to balance, all of us need to balance our gaming and our, TV and phone and laptop time with other healthy activities. So what's the right balance for you? And if you can agree on a family goal, then if you are going out, even signal the day before, hey, we're going to be going out. I would love to leave the door open and allow gaming. What do you think would be needed to have that happen? And see if you can come up with some agreements where they are getting the out time or the exercise or the homework or the other things done that you think are a healthy balance in order to have the gaming when you go out. So that's what I would suggest. But yes, I actually think it's reasonable. And we take our kids electronics at night after 9:30 because they are really addictive devices. And there's a lot of scary stories out there. Like if you've seen the movie Screenagers, I think most kids are not on, unless they're neglecting health food or, to an extreme degree, like losing weight, then I think most kids are just a little bit overloaded as opposed to clinically addicted.
Okay, thank you. All right. Next question. How do you balance not being a tiger mom and with helping a child live up to its full potential?
Yeah, this is a hard one. I mean, we love our kids so much and we see the amazing, successful humans that they could be. And it's hard to watch the messy process of a child becoming an adult. And I would just say, think down the road to the 30-year-old that you hope to have a relationship with, who is accomplishing things under their own steam, right? The path to that 30-year-old is not you directing and bossing and telling them and setting the goals for them. It's being more of a mentor or coach who helps them figure out what goals they want to set and breaking them down into small pieces and letting them try and fail and try again. Because the question I would ask to you is, if you are bossing and directing and helping your child figure out how to achieve the goals you set now, like when do you stop? Do you stop when they go off to college? Because then they might have a really rocky college experience. Do you stop when they get their first job? Right? There's no end point when you can say, okay, I've taken care of everything up until now and go, right? It's not realistic to think they're going to just flip a switch and be able to do it all on themselves. They have to build it up themselves. So I would just write yourself some mantras, take some deep breaths. It will be okay. And they have to get there on their own. They cannot be living your version of their life, right? They have to figure out what their version of their best life is.
Thank you. All right, next question. Natural consequences work well unless the stakes are too high. A child's health impacted by chronic sleep deficit or bombing the SAT AP exams during junior year. What to do then?
Yes. So yeah, we always say their exception for natural and logical consequences is safety or health concern. But you need to really have a high bar for what is a health concern, because in some ways you could say anything's a health concern. I would offer that this year of any year is a year when the rules are broken, right? Schools are test optional now. So I have a junior as well, and he's way behind on his AP studying, and it gives me some agita, right? Because I know he could do so well, and colleges are going test optional. He's going to need to figure out how he's going to manage his time and thrive and succeed in junior and senior year in order to be successful at college. So around the testing and the studying, I think, we need to let them have their own control of that. We can support them in helping figure out a plan. And that's where you say, hey, how can I support you in coming up with a plan? Would you like reminders? How can I remind you? Or, so that you're asking for permission as opposed to dictating. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, I see bags under your eyes. You can't get up in the morning. And it concerns me that you have a chronic sleep deficit. This is a serious issue. How are we going to resolve it? right? And if they're like, oh, I don't know, right? Say, hey, I want you to take the lead on this. I would love your ideas. And if you're not going to come up with ideas, I'm going to have to decide on my own. And I'd really rather collaborate on a solution. So if you can agree on like rough frameworks of bedtime and wake time and, electronics in the bedroom, those are the kind of parameters that give you a little bit of guardrails without being 100% in charge.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I have a junior as well, so I definitely feel all of your pain. So I'm right there with you.
And actually, the Dartmouth, I just discovered this podcast called The Search that the Dartmouth admissions office has that has some really reassuring episodes.
Okay, we'll have to
on the college admissions process.
Because it's giving me hives. All right, so, okay, next question. What if I can't convince my partner to set the same screen time for the entire family? My husband can't stop looking at his phone, playing video games, and sitting in front of the computer.
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's a hard one. So yeah, I think that's like a calls for a heart to heart with your husband and say like, how are we going to raise these kids to have a healthy balance of screens if you're modeling this? And try to come up with an agreement. So, and maybe it is, he does it in another room or he has, has some agreements, but that's just a really hard one. When it comes to rules and sort of supportive interactions, I always say like, you do what you can do. You can't control your partner, but on issues that affect the whole family, I think it's really important to at least broach the subject and see if you can come to a compromise. So yeah, I would say like, just see if you can draw him into a conversation about like, hey, what do you see as the end game here, right? That it's like, do you feel like this is healthy for our kids to, if our kids behave this way? So, but yeah, it's a hard one.
Thanks. Next question. Strategy for parenting a teen who wants to do opposite of anything I suggest. When putting together a college list, I'm not skilled enough to try using reverse psychology.
Yes. Stop suggesting. So I suggested a school that I thought would be perfect for him. And apparently on Reddit, he found that they have insects in the food in the dining hall. So because one person posted it on Reddit, forget that school, it's off the list. I had a great conversation with my cousin actually, who has older kids. And she said, this is a very normal process where they reject. And then the college counselor at the school is going to say, you need to have more schools on your list. So I would say stop suggesting, and if you want to work through, the adult who's presumably at the schools who's helping him, or her through that conversation, you could have a back channel, but if your child is rejecting your suggestions, you better stop suggesting and just have confidence that this is an important decision for them to make themselves. My stepdaughter chose the wrong school. She just, was using parameters that didn't work. And then she transferred after a year. And I think the experience of choosing the wrong school and then deciding to transfer and having a great 3 years at the school she ended up at was better for her, and learning about herself and learning how to make a hard decision to transfer than anything, right? It was a better outcome than if she had really taken my advice, sorry, and pick the right school the first time around. So I know it's just so hard to watch them do it, but I would say you got to stop suggesting.
Okay, thanks. And the next question, lack of executive functioning, like time management and organization of stuff. How much is normal for a teen boy versus indication of something like ADHD?
Oh, very good question. So we know the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully mature until 25 or 26. So all kids are on that continuum of executive function to some degree or another. So I would say if you're concerned about ADHD, it never hurts to explore. So you could ask his teachers if they have a concern. You could ask him if he finds it challenging to keep track of stuff or to, meet his obligations. I think everyone can benefit from executive function scaffolding. So even if you don't think it's bad enough, or you don't see enough signs that you want to get a testing and a diagnosis, you can still support his executive function. So you can read the books on ADHD and help create some of the scaffolding that works for kids with ADHD and see if it helps, right? You don't need to have a diagnosis to do some of that time management help, or chunking assignments, or helping him set goals and manage his work better. So, but again, like, I would ask for permission, ask for an invitation to help support, as opposed to trying to just do it.
Great, thank you. So I guess I'm not seeing any more questions in the feed. So if you do have a question, now's your last chance. So put it down in the Q&A. In the meantime, somebody asked, will this recording be sent out later? Now we will be sending out a link to the recording after the presentation. However, it will only be available for just a couple of weeks. So once it goes out, you can view it as many times as you'd like. And then after, I think, approximately 2 weeks, that video is going to be removed. Okay, so I'm just giving you all fair warning on that. Okay, and then that'll show up in the message as well when it goes out.
And
Okay.
I can include my slides as well, because I know I went through them kind of quickly.
Yeah. So, okay. So, and we will post the slides, and it will definitely be available on MIT's in the past events section if you're from the MIT Club of Washington, D.C. And we will send the slides over to Harvard and Columbia as well. So they'll have those available. Okay, so I guess if there are no additional questions, then I guess we can call it a night. So thank you so much, Katherine, for everything. And for if any of you are interested, I've read her book, The Good News About Bad Behavior, and it's fabulous. So, I mean, you may want to go and check it out if it's something that you think may be helpful for you. But thank you, Katherine, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Really wonderful to have this conversation and be in community with all of you.
Yeah, great. And everybody, thank you for joining us, and have a great night.